Okay, so welcome to our webinar this morning. Thank you very much for attending. Hopefully you're going to find it beneficial and interesting. My name is Daniel O'Brien. I'm actually the founder of Opius and the creator of iAbacus. I've been working with schools now and senior leaders in schools for about 25 years. My focus for the last 15 years has actually been on school self-evaluation and improvement planning. That sounds rather dull, doesn't it? But I assure you, hopefully you'll see today that the method, that the models that I use and my colleagues use are really empowering, really interesting, and are good to work with. So today's session, I thought I'd break it down into three different sections. First of all, we are going to take a look at the report card and the Ofsted Toolkit and how that affects self-evaluation and school improvement planning. We're also going to look at the abacus model that's been empowering educators for about 50 years. It's a principle-based model for self-evaluation and improvement planning, and I think you'll see that it really fits well with the direction that things are going. Not that things have changed direction, but just the way that schools are being encouraged to reflect and improve. And then we're going to look at iAbacus, which is a really simple online tool that just streamlines the whole process. And of course, we'll answer questions at the end. If you do have any questions, feel free to use the Q&A or the chat box, or to raise your hand. I'll do my best to answer them at the end. I will try and keep an eye on the chat box as the session's progressing, although sometimes I'll just kind of park it till later. But if it's relevant, I'll answer there and then. So let's begin. I do have some screen sharing to do. It's not a boring PowerPoint with loads of words and bullet points on. Sometimes it's just nice to see things visually that we're talking about. So if you bear with me while I just share my screen, I've got everything arranged in a browser, so hopefully that's going to work. And we'll start to talk about the report card and the toolkit. So first of all, I must admit that I talk about these things with some trepidation. I realise that they are full of contentious issues. There's a lot of dialogue online about these things, and I understand them, and I'm empathetic. So please, if anything comes across here where we're looking at this, I don't want to be judgmental. This is about making things simpler and more effective for you and your colleagues. So the report card itself, obviously, we've got that now with 5 levels and a lot of areas, 10 different areas to be evaluated, to be looked at. And along with the report card and the whole inspection process comes this toolkit. And I find the toolkit really interesting. And I've put toolkit in question marks. Well, I've put a question mark behind it there. And the reason I've put that there is because, I don't know about you, but when I saw the phrase toolkit, I expected to see resources and guidance and videos and tools. After all, it's a toolkit. And what I actually found, like you, was a set of criteria, a rubric, which is fine. We've always had great descriptors along with the Ofsted framework. But it was a little bit disappointing to find that the toolkit wasn't really a kit. It was just a framework. But saying that, I actually think that when it comes to self-evaluation and diagnostic and analysing where we are as a school, this toolkit is really helpful. It's got immense clarity and transparency. So it's something actually that, yes, there are issues wrapped around the inspection process, the model, the workload associated with it. But actually, when we look at this toolkit, this is something of value that I think will support schools. So let's just look at what the framework entails. Well, it's become granular, I think is the word that they're using, which is fine. And basically what we're looking at is expanding some of the 4 areas that were evaluated previously into 10 different areas. And when we say granular, here's a good example. We take quality of education, and where that was one judgment area and one aspect of self-evaluation, it's now been broken down into curriculum, developing, teaching and achievement. And I actually think when it comes to self-evaluation and improvement planning, this is a positive. Obviously, there was quite a bulk of information or bulk of evidence or bulk of analytical thinking that you would do around quality of education. Well, now actually that's been broken down into these 3 different areas. Another good example of the way that it's become more granular is the way that some aspects of provision, the profile of them has just been raised. So we now see attendance, inclusion, their kind of their own areas, and then also bolted on to personal development we have pupils' well-being. Well, none of us would argue that that's not highly important, so we'd want to see that as something that we're focusing on. So the framework itself means that we have an expansion of these areas. It also means that we have additional areas, although if you look at the toolkit and you look at exemplary, that is something that has to go to an external body for improvement. So if we're looking at the 4 main areas causing concern through to strong, they're perhaps the levels that we might self-evaluate ourselves against if we're going to use the toolkit as a basis for self-evaluation and for improvement planning. I thought it was interesting that even at the moment we're still not 100% sure of where things are going. I think if you look at the letters that are going back and forth between important members of Ofsted and the DFE and even government, that you can see there is pressure for things to change, but I feel that when you read between the lines you acknowledge there's some resistance to change. This letter that went from Sir Martin Oliver just on the 11th of June shows a resistance to change the report card structure and the levels, mainly on the basis of parent feedback being so positive and the YouGov survey being so positive. So naturally they want to try and stick to that. I did find it interesting as well that if you look in the letter that's in the background there's a comment on the actual toolkit. Doesn't say that the toolkit's going to be modified in any way, only that they'll define the grades and the boundaries more clearly. So I think that the framework itself might not change that much, and the consequence of that is that the toolkit will pretty much remain intact. But like I said earlier, that maybe isn't a bad thing because of the nature of the toolkit and how it can be used. Just one reference point in the toolkit. Obviously my interest is always self-evaluation and improvement planning and how we can streamline that and where that sits in the framework. A quick search for self-evaluation, it doesn't actually appear in the new toolkit, but what does appear is this reference that highlights the importance of school leaders having an acute understanding of strengths and weaknesses and really having this culture of continuous improvement, which one would argue that these things have always been in place anyway, but we can see that they are highlighted in the toolkit. So the toolkit's available online as it currently stands and will probably be adjusted in the near future. So we're not going to spend a lot more time discussing that. Only acknowledge that this is the way things are going, and that actually if we use this toolkit wisely, it can really enhance school self-evaluation and improvement planning. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen for a moment. Okay, just bear with me if I can make sure I click the right button and don't click leave, which I have been known to do mid-meeting. So I will send out a link actually with some additional materials that I've created over the last week or so. In particularly, this is where I want to share the screen again, so if you just bear with me while I just arrange that. There's one document that I did create in the last week or so, and it's this document, which is a guide to migrating a school self-evaluation from the EIF to the 2025 toolkit. Okay, it's quite an interesting document in as much as it highlights what we were talking about earlier about this granularity now and the highlighting of other areas and how that might make a pathway if you've got an existing school self-evaluation and you want to look at how you'd kind of extract portions out of that and slot them into a self-evaluation that maps to the new toolkit. So it's quite a detailed document. I think it's about 15 pages, but it is quite interesting in how it's structured. We actually used high-level artificial intelligence to look at the two frameworks and where there were overlaps and where pathways could be drawn. So I'll send this out to all participants, and hopefully you'll find that interesting and also beneficial. So we'll just stop the screen sharing for a moment. Okay, so obviously there have been different frameworks over recent years. We had the Ofsted framework, and then we had the Common Inspection framework, and then we had the EIF, and now we've got the Toolkit and the report card that's associated with it. And one of the things that we've been able to do as an organisation is to maintain a consistent approach with the schools that we work with, because we use a principle-based model, something where criteria can change and frameworks can change, but the language that we use for self-evaluation and for improvement planning and the model that we follow doesn't change. And that, I think, schools have found really empowering, because the criteria can change, but their processes internally and their documentation and their actual school self-evaluation and improvement plan can stay the same and actually stay just as robust. And the reason we're able to do that is because we use this abacus model. So I don't know if you're familiar with the abacus model. It's actually been around for about 50 years, and it is used primarily in education. It is used in other sectors as well, but it is based on a literal abacus. This is one of the original abacuses used by the model's creator, actually, John Pierce. John was a head teacher himself. He was an English lead for a while. He was an inspector for a while, lead consultant at the National College even. And he used this model with schools, and it became quite popular. And I think it became really popular because of its simplicity, but also its rigour. It's the robust nature of it. And it's based around having an abacus to break down areas of operational effectiveness or personal performance or school effectiveness. And you can break it down using an abacus and have different areas. So obviously, the EIF, we had 4 main key areas, and you'd have 4 beads. Now you might have 10 different beads for 10 different areas. The beauty of it is that the model is really simple to grasp and therefore apply to any framework. I'll talk you through the 4 stages in the model. Now, please don't think this is simplistic and kind of, I'm using obviously what could be classed as a toy or a simple apparatus here, but you'll find that actually this model can be used for all forms of school self-evaluation and improvement planning. And you start by breaking things down. So you might have a bead for leadership, you might have a bead for leadership and governance now, you might even have a bead for personal development and well-being of learners. And what you do, or what the model would ask someone to do, or a team of individuals to do, is to make judgments, to make instinctive professional judgments. Use your nous, your practical intelligence about how things are in the school right now, to make a judgment about something and slide a bead. And over here on an abacus represents outstanding or strong or exemplary in the new framework. And you can see now how the language really is irrelevant, because what we've got is a continuum of improvement, and over here being excellent or outstanding, and in different frameworks it's called different things. And people could quite instinctively make judgments and say, actually, I think leadership and governance is really strong, bordering on exemplary. It might be right up here. But in reality, our quality of teaching or pupils' personal development might not be as strong, and you start to make instinctive judgments. And then there's 4 stages that we would guide people through. Now, the first stage is to make sure that that initial gut or nous or professional based judgment is accurate. So what we would want that person to do, or that team of individuals to do, is to look at criteria. And that might be a great descriptor as language as we know it, but it also now might be the Ofsted toolkit. And as we looked earlier, we've got these different levels with clear criteria showing what expectations are. So if we're making a judgment, this first step in the abacus process to look at criteria has really now been enhanced, because we've got criteria to look at, detailed criteria for all of the levels. It made me laugh really in the previous framework, where you'd have kind of a level that would just say, okay, it's not good. Whereas now you've got more detailed criteria. So the first thing was all about criteria. The second question makes complete logical sense. Well, what evidence have you got? How can you justify that judgment? And what can you signpost in your school or in your personal performance or in your business? Whatever it is, what evidence do you have? That's a logical step, and one that schools are used to. The next step, actually, I'm not so sure is used as widely as I think it could be. And that is about looking at helping factors, things pushing the bead in the right direction. If you've said that leadership is at this point, what got it to there? What are the helping factors? Because if we can diagnose those helping factors, then they're the things that we can strengthen. And on the other side of the abacus bead, if you like, are the hindering factors, the barriers to improvement. If we can diagnose what those are, if we can verbalise them, if we're open enough and have an honest appraisal of where things are at, then these are the things we need to tackle. And once we carry out this force field analysis, this simple identifying of helps and hinders, then we can put together an action plan, because we can strengthen the helps and tackle the hinders. So 4 stages. Where are we and how do we know, based on criteria? What's our evidence to support it? What's helping, what's hindering, and what are we going to do about it? And this model is used with literal abacuses like the one I've got in front of me here. It's also used on paper, on flip charts. It's a great way to host an interactive session where you put a line and then you say, okay, well, where are we? And then you follow through with that model. And this model's been used, like I mentioned, in all different sectors. It's got a real home in education, because actually that's where it came from. It came out of education, it came out of school leadership. But it also makes it quite an intuitive way to have an online tool. And that's where we're going to look at now, is how you take something as simple and robust as the abacus model and then use it online in an online tool. So I'm going to share with you what iAbacus looks like, because the model, which is robust and works and has been in action in schools for a long time, is available as an online tool. Okay, and what you have with iAbacus is the ability to kind of use exactly the same model but in an interactive and visual fashion. And with iAbacus, obviously we have the Ofsted Toolkit, so this is the new framework. Okay, we have for many years had the EIF as an abacus that schools have used to self-evaluate and improve. You can have abacuses for attendance or behaviour or SMSC or British values or any aspect of provision or even subject leadership. You can have an abacus for a member of staff, because that process, that model that we've been talking about, where you evaluate, diagnose and improve, is relevant for professional development and for appraisal. You can even have collaborative abacuses where individual schools all place their beads on the abacus, and a multi-academy trust or a federation of a position of oversight can seed the information. Okay, if it's collaborative, if it's shared. Similarly, in a school, you might look at personal development as an aspect of provision and ask your subject leaders to slide the beads to where they think they're at. So this model that we have is completely universal. And I'll be honest, it fits the new toolkit like a glove. And when the new toolkit came out, I think within about half an hour we had an abacus online. There's a YouTube video clip from when we launched it. Again, with kind of a level of caution to how much we're prescribing the way schools should do things. But actually, in reality, this is incredibly simple and effective. So why not promote it as a means of making the most of changes in the sector at the moment? So let's have a look how it works. Okay, I'm just going to start a fresh abacus, and I'm going to pick the relevant template, which is the draft framework. Okay, and it will give me a blank abacus where I start with my judgments. But one thing I do want to highlight, even at this point, that yes, we've got a template based on the toolkit for 2025. It might change, but you might want to change it. Your school might have different priorities, and with iAbacus, because it's a model, it's a platform, you can actually just customize any abacus, and you can say, okay, we don't have a sixth form, we don't have an early years, we're not going to focus on achievement at the moment. I say not focus on it, it's not, maybe you might evaluate it differently using your MIS or something like that. But you can see here very quickly what I've been able to do is just tailor the structure. Okay, I've actually focused it down a bit, and I believe that sometimes it is about focusing thought and taking out the things that aren't going to be considered right at this moment in time. But it starts with the same process. Stage one was always making a judgment and sliding the bead, and that's the case here. You slide the bead to where, as a school, you feel you are, and you might make an initial gut judgment that actually things are really strong. And then what will happen is that abacus bead will expand, and you will see the 4 key areas or the key stages that we're going to guide you through. What's the criteria look like? Is this an accurate judgment? What evidence do we have to justify that judgment? Let's analyse the situation. Why are we at this point, and what are we going to do about it? So let's dive into the criteria. Okay, so if you're familiar with the toolkit, you'll start to recognise what we're looking at here. Now, I've placed the bead in strong, okay, because that was my initial judgment, and we want to empower people to be able to make that initial judgment, but we might want them to moderate it. Okay, so we show them the toolkit, we show them all of the criteria, and this is why I think it's got some value, because now we've got 100% transparency. And it might be that in discussion with colleagues or on reflection, I have to moderate that and say, do you know what, maybe actually we're like top end of secure because we're doing a lot of these things really well, we meet a lot of this criteria. Okay, so hence this criteria is incredibly important. It informs the judgment. Incidentally, I think actually the criteria also helps with the next stage, because we move from making a judgment into providing our evidence. And often actually our criteria helps us to think about what evidence we might start to signpost. So when you're in iAbacus, you click on evidence, you can signpost evidence in any form. It might be that you write your text description here, your golden paragraphs, and your kind of really evaluative statements. And schools are good at doing this. They're used to doing this. It's part of the abacus process. So you'll type your text in here. It might be actually that you hyperlink off to shared folders or files, surveys, reports that are in your data systems. So whatever online systems you're already using in school, you'll signpost your evidence. And if you're a trust with schools that are using a coherent system, that's great, but maybe you're a trust where schools have got their different evidences stored in different ways. Doesn't really matter with iAbacus because it's part of this evaluation process and we just signpost it. Okay, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on evidence because we know what it is. This though is slightly more impressive. I say impressive, more important. Okay, it's the analysis. Why are we at this position? If we've dragged that bead into, just into secure, what stopped us from dragging it further to the right? What are those hindering factors? But what helped us get to this point? It's interesting that the guidance says that schools should have an acute awareness of their strengths and weaknesses. We're looking at what's helping and what's hindering. And all we do really is just type into these boxes. I made that sound really simple, and it's a simple process. The thought behind it is a lot more complex. We have to think about what has got us to this position. So we can celebrate successes, we can use positive language, and if you're using the paper-based version of this model or you're doing it on a flip chart, this is a fantastic process because it really helps you identify what's working well, what got you to this position. If there was something that was a really big help or a big kind of sustaining factor, it might be something that you prioritize and move to the top. Okay, as far as the hindering factors go, that makes sense that we put those in. We often advise colleagues not to shy away from negative language. Let's make an honest appraisal. If something's a barrier, it's something we can tackle in the action plan. And again, if something is a priority, we can move it to the top of the list. So this analysis process, it's a great kind of brainstorming session. It's a great dialogue to have with colleagues. It can be done interactively like this, but the model just allows us to kind of really focus down on what's helping and hindering. Let's move into the action planning. First thing we would say here is if your diagnostic is really good and you've thought of lots of helps and hinders, then we need to prioritize. And sometimes that is about actually hiding the things that we're not going to focus on, the things that we're not going to work on. So in the tool, we just allow people to grey them out. Okay, you might strike through them if you're doing it on paper, but in the tool, we promote things that we're going to work on, we expand them, and then we say, right, what is it we're going to do about it? We've identified it as a hindering factor. This is where I've just typed something incorrect into here, so you'll bear with me while I just let this type and then I'll come back and fix it. Okay, in the what, obviously it's where we put our action. What are we going to do? And this is where we migrate from the analysis of kind of what's hindering us into the action planning, and why, when you use iAbacus, you don't need a school self-evaluation and an improvement plan as a separate document, because you've got this coherent process. So who's going to lead on that? Obviously that might be part of the school central team or the trust central team, or even your middle leaders. Your success criteria, how will you know when this action is having an impact? Makes sense to say when it's going to be done by. Even really makes sense to say how much progress we've made on this. So let's just put some progress in here, and maybe even a progress update. Okay. So all we've done here is follow the model. Slider bead to make a judgment about where we are on this five leveled continuum. We've then followed through and put some evidence, analysis and action planning. If we do that for the other areas, we get that visual snapshot of where we are. But actually it's more than just a visual snapshot, isn't it? Because we know the process that's just took place behind each bead, and that's why it's robust. And that's why actually, as far as the self-evaluation and improvement plan goes, it is a really incredibly effective way of doing it. You'll probably want to share this as a PDF document, and you can do that. You can just download it. Okay, so what you'll find, you'll have got your evidence, your judgments, your evidence, your helps and hinders, and then your action planning. So this is a really kind of clear and coherent document. I like the way it's concise and that it's really easy to share. I mentioned earlier that you can have abacuses where other people contribute and you get like an overlay. That's all taken care of through the collaboration. The beauty of that is if you're a multi-academy trust and you've got a number of schools and you want to empower them with a model, a process that lets their judgment come first, it's validated with evidence and analysis, then you can do that. But one of the things you can do is you can pull all of those evaluations together. So let's say you've got a folder full of evaluations. In just a couple of clicks, I'll overlay them, and now I can see where my schools are at, or where our schools are at. But also, if I'm concerned about something, I can click on that. I can have a look at the evidence, have a look at the analysis, what's hindering them, and what do they plan to do about it. So these are like dashboards, not data dashboards where you're trying to kind of look at graphs and bar charts and pie charts. What we're looking at here is human insight. People have made evidence-based judgments. They've thought about the helps and hinders, and they've put together action plans. So these are incredibly insightful. So that's the online tool that schools are using. It maps perfectly to the new toolkit. It will be adjusted if the toolkit's adjusted, but it can also be tailored to suit your school, your trust, and your context. And I think that's really important. So what I'm going to do is stop sharing for a moment. Time has cracked on quite quickly. It's now 28 minutes past 11. I'm going to click on Q&A and have a quick look just to see whether we've got any questions come in. Please feel free to use the chat as well. That's just actually spinning on my screen, so we'll just give that a few seconds. Interesting question, Russell, about breaking down individual criteria. Yes, it can do. What I'll show you is a way that actually that can be done in iAbacus, because sometimes it can be that you want to actually rag rate individual criteria. So for example, if I look in our templates, okay, and this is probably what we'll do, we'll probably take the framework and actually break it down further, if that's useful to schools. But if I scroll down here, for example, let's have a look. So the current framework, so this is the EIF, where we took exactly the same process. We broke it down, and now what we have in here is the ability to evaluate something like personal development and then say, let's look at the criteria to validate that judgment. But what we've also got in here now are the original statements and the ability to rag rate them. So it's a really good question, because it's a lot of what we do with schools is helping them make that accurate judgment, but then also validate that by saying, okay, these are the individual branches or statements, and this makes it even more granular than it is at the moment. And interestingly, you can make judgments about these different statements. If there is something that you've put as red but you want to add a description of why, you can even expand that and put in here why. check boxes, compliances, tick boxes, they are good, but you need to be able to add context and say, actually, I've ticked this as red, or validated this as red, but here's why, because we do it differently in our school. You may be a special school and do things slightly differently. So yes, we can break things down even further if we need to, into that greater detail. Any more questions? I'm keeping my eye on the time. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for your attendance today and to staying online. I appreciate that. If you do have any questions, please feel free to email me or to book a one-to-one. What I'll do, if I just click on new posts. Okay, Charlotte, thank you very much. You've asked about costs. Very good question. The platform, the iAbacus platform, which includes users and templates and iAbacus for middle leaders and staff development, even iAbacus for learner review and growth planning, is $995 per year. Okay, but that's everything. That's kind of the whole platform, if we're going to call it something. What we do have available is a version of iAbacus, if you like, a special edition, just for doing the CEF and the SIP, just for doing your school improvement plan. And if I'll email everyone, but if you're interested in that, we're looking at about $395 for that, and that's just because we want to make it affordable at kind of a level where you can get into it and maybe expand your use down the line. We actually have a really nice approach with iAbacus. It cascades. Your school leaders start to use it for school improvement planning, and then you realise actually this would be really good if your middle leaders and subject leaders could have one of these for their curriculum area. So then you roll it out there, and then they think actually this is really good, our teachers should have this, and then you roll it out there, and then teachers say actually we should have this for learners. So there's a really nice cascade approach that we can use. Match use, yes, there are. If you're relating to money, then there are discounts for multi-academy trusts. We also have Mat Vista, which is a version of iAbacus for trusts, and it looks at trust quality assurance. It's got the trust quality descriptions and the multi-academy trust assurance framework in it. If you have multiple schools, we provide that free of charge. Okay, so please reach out to us with regards to an approach that might work in your school or in your trust. The final screen that I'm going to share is my details to book a one-to-one meeting if you want one. Okay, so if you bear with me, I'm going to go into my presentation, and I think it's the final screen. So hopefully you're seeing that. My email address is on here, and just a link where you can book an online meeting with me. Hopefully you've seen that my approach isn't hard sell. It's more of a consultative approach. We want to make iAbacus work for you. As I said, I've been working on this with my team now for about 15 years, and how our whole ethos is about simplifying and streamlining things. And I believe the Ofsted Toolkit, while it's got some negativity attached to it, it's going to be a great support tool when you combine it with things like iAbacus. So thank you very much again for your attendance. Really appreciate that. Have a great day.